As well as taking full control of the National Army in 1924, as we discussed last week, the Irish Free State government sought to do likewise with local government, at least limit local authorities to administrative and technocratic issues, and to stay out of national politics. This led to the dissolution of Dublin Corporation in May 1924. Since the Local Government Ireland Act of 1898, local government in Ireland was streamlined through the establishment of county, urban and rural district councils. Before 1920, most local authorities in Ireland were dominated by the Irish Parliamentary Party. Local elections were scheduled to be held every 3 years. But with the postponement of the 1917 elections due to the First World War, there was a 6-year gap from the 1914 to the 1920 local elections. The 1920 elections also saw the introduction of proportional representation, PR. It was an attempt by the British government to thwart the level of victory Sinn Féin won in the 1918 general election. As PR was such a new concept and considerably more complex than the first past the post system, circulars were sent to each local authority by the Proportional Representation Society of Ireland, with instructions on the trainings needed for electors and candidates for the upcoming elections. In the municipal elections in January 1920, Sinn Féin won the most seats with 560. The new PR system did see minorities win new representation in many urban districts. Labour made huge gains, winning 394 seats, more than Unionists, who won 355. Home Rulers won 238, Independents won 161 seats, while Municipal Reformers won 108 seats. The PR system saw Sinn Féin take seats in what were previously Unionist strongholds in Ulster, while Unionists likewise won seats in nationalist strongholds in the south. Republicans took control in Dublin, Cork and Limerick, while Waterford and Derry had no single party in overall charge. For the elections to county councils and rural district councils in late May, early June 1920, on top of its overriding separatist agenda, Sinn Féin promised to build more public houses and improve health and other services. And here's a Sinn Féin Rural District Council leaflet for Carlingford in County Louth. Its victory was more comprehensive. They're not advancing that one, okay?
No, we're still looking at 1921. We're still looking at
Okay, I'm going to have to try share here. That's working now, yeah? Great.
But not the top site.
Just bear with me 1 second.
For everybody listening at home, we're just having some slight technical issues.
Okay, apologies for that. So in the municipal elections in for elections to county councils and rural district councils in late May, early June 1920, on top of its overriding separatist agenda, I think let's go back here. Yeah, Sinn Féin promised to build more public housing, improve health and other local services. And here's the Sinn Féin Rural District Council leaflet for Carlingford and County Louth. Its victory was more comprehensive than January, with the party taking control of 27 out of 33 county councils. And in Fermanagh and Tyrone, it combined with nationalists to form majorities. Of 206 rural district councils, Sinn Féin took 172 and therefore also controlled most boards of poor law guardians. In Ulster, where Sinn Féin was weakest, the party won control of 36 of Ulster's 55 rural districts. The 1920 local elections saw a big increase in levels of female participation and representation. Here's a Sinn Féin campaign poster in Wicklow urging women to vote for Robert Barton. In total, 42 women were elected to local councils in 1920. Some were prominent members of Cumann na mBan. Others included social and healthcare reform campaigners. In Dublin City, 4 women won seats. They were Kathleen Clark, who won seats in 2 wards, Hannah Sheehy Skeffington, Jenny Wise Power, and Thomasina McGarry. In Carlow, 3 women were elected in a ward with 9 seats. While the majority of female candidates were Sinn Féin supporters, a number stood for independent Labour. Lady Albinia Broderick, an Irish Republican, the first female elected to Kerry County Council. Women also acted as chair or vice chair in Listowel, Rathdrum, Clifton and Strokestown district councils. Alice Cashel, elected as vice chair of Galway County Council in 1920, played a crucial role in the process of reforming local government and bringing it under the authority of Dáil Éireann. The results of the 1920 local elections granted the Dáil a lot more credibility and power. Sinn Féin members became chairpersons and vice chairpersons of most local authorities. The Dáil's Department of Local Government, headed up by W.T. Cosgrave, was considerably more influential after the elections. Most of the newly elected local authorities passed resolutions recognising Dáil Éireann, while rejecting the British-controlled local government board, headquartered in the Custom House in Dublin. This allowed Sinn Féin to take control of the internal administration of most jurisdictions in Ireland. The move was instrumental in legitimising Dáil Éireann, but it came with a heavy price. Sinn Féin soon discovered the limits of popular sovereignty, though, as instead of transferring payment of local rates from the British to Sinn Féin, many locals decided not to pay any rates at all. On top of losing grants and funding from the local government board, dissenting local authorities and their officials became targets of legal cases, raids, arrests, and jail terms. Some senior figures in local government lost their lives during the War of Independence. The Lord Mayor of Cork, Tomás McCurtain, was killed by the RIC in March 1920. His successor, Terence McSweeney, died from a hunger strike later in the year in October. In March 1921, the Mayor of Limerick, George Clancy, and his predecessor, Michael O'Callaghan, were killed by Crown forces, and pictured are the funerals of Clancy and O'Callaghan. The Department of Local Government and Public Health was formed after the establishment of the Irish Free State in 1922. While most local authorities supported the 1921 Anglo-Irish Treaty, some were controlled by Republicans. Dublin Corporation was predominantly pro-treaty. According to an IRA intelligence report from 12th of November 1922, of the 52 pro-treaty councillors, 10 were hard pro-treatyites, real bad eggs, 10 were treaty, including Lawrence O'Neill and Alfie Byrne, and 32 were pro-treaty, but not so bad. The report listed 16 as Republicans or anti-treaty. As with Dublin Corporation, even those with a majority on the pro-treaty side were appalled by the heavy-handed tactics of the National Army, and particularly the execution and imprisonment of Republicans during the Civil War. It is also important to note that while Dublin Corporation was pro-treaty, the poor attendance at meetings often allowed the anti-treaty side to dominate proceedings. The new Free State government, conscious of how local government had been used so effectively against the British, learned a lesson, according to Ewan O'Halpin. The more leeway such bodies had, the more these could embarrass and defy central government. After independence, they took steps to thwart Republicans, attempting to use the same tactics against them. The Free State Minister for Local Government, Ernest Bly, wasted little time in stamping his authority. Officials from his department were sent to audit and inspect many local councils, and the difficulties of local authorities were viewed from the centre with exasperation. Bly passed the Local Election Postponement Act in December 1922, allowing the Free State government to defer local elections over the coming decades. He then introduced a significant piece of legislation, the Local Government Temporary Provisions Act. This legislation gave power to the minister to dissolve local authorities and replace them with a centrally appointed commissioner. During a committee stage Dáil debate on the proposed legislation in February 1923, Blythe singled out Kerry County Council for criticism. He stated that the council had not met over the previous 8 months and that rate collection was at a standstill. According to A. Quinlivan, while rate collections in counties such as Kerry was indeed a shambles, there was a feeling that one motivation behind the proposed legislation was to curtail the activities of troublesome local authorities, especially those who were showing support for the anti-treaty side in the Civil War. From May 1923 to March 1924, 7 local bodies were dissolved, including 2 county councils. Kerry and Leitrim County Councils were dissolved in May 1923, Kerry County Board of Health in June 1923, Mohill Rural District Council in August 1923, the Dublin Board of Guardians in November 1923, Roscommon Town Commissioners in February 1924, and New Ross Urban District Council in March 1924. Would the government take on the oldest public body in the country, though Dublin Corporation? Although most in Dublin Corporation were pro-treaty, it was increasingly at loggerheads with the Free State government, particularly over political issues the Free State government felt was its preserve alone. Speaking in 1925, W.T. Cosgrave stated, "The meeting of the local authority is not the place for discussions of political issues. In the past, these questions were indeed obtruded to the disadvantages of local administration, but there was an excuse in the absence of a National Assembly where they could properly be dealt with. The Oireachtas, the Sovereign Assembly of the nation, is now available to settle such matters." An illustration of how far the Free State government and Dublin Corporation diverge from each other was in the treatment of Republican prisoners during and after the Civil War. Spearheaded by the Women's Prisoner Defence League, the WPDL, which became a particular thorn in the side of the Free State government in advocating for proper treatment of prisoners, public bodies such as Dublin Corporation offered substantial support to the WPDL during its campaigns. At a WPDL meeting on 19th of November 1922, held on the ruined part of O'Connell Street, the Freeman's Journal reported that national troops in a Crossley tender and armoured car came into contact with a large crowd attending a prisoners' protest meeting in O'Connell Street, Dublin, yesterday. WPDL, Women Prisoners Defence League. Yeah, WPDL, yeah. Some shots were fired and at least 6 persons were wounded. Following the shooting, there were wild scenes of panic. People rushed in all directions seeking shelter. And in the confusion and excitement, boys and girls were knocked down. And here's an image from the Freeman's Journal of a makeshift ambulance hut on O'Connell Street, where the wounded were taken after the shooting. Witnesses claim the machine gun was used. Lily Bennett, who was aged 17 and originally from Kinnegad in County Westmeath, was boarding a tram car for Dollymount when she was struck in the lung by a bullet. She was brought to Jervis Street Hospital, where she died at 2 p.m. the following day. And here is Lily Bennett's death certificate. The incident was condemned by many people and bodies at the time. At a Dublin Corporation meeting a day later, on 20th of November, with WPDL leaders Maud Gonn and Charlotte Despard in the gallery, who occasionally interrupted proceedings, Alderman Thomas P. O'Reilly condemned the action of the military authorities on Sunday in firing upon unarmed civilians in O'Connell Street. Councillor John O'Callaghan said that he was a treatyite by conviction, and he was sorry that he had to associate himself with the protest against the proceedings on Sunday. He was on the outskirts of the crowd, and into that peaceful gathering there was driven a motor car full of armed soldiers. There was a protest on behalf of the people, and the next thing he saw was those soldiers rising in their seats in the lorry and firing down into and upon the crowd. An armoured car came along from the opposite direction, and while rifles were speaking, a machine gun was also speaking. He was absolutely opposed to the rule of the gun and the bomb, but he thought that those who did not agree with them ought to be allowed to use their voice in a constitutional manner. While much focus on the proceedings of that Dublin Corporation meeting was on the shootings the day before, Members also were due to discuss the treatment of Republican prisoners. A key component of the WPDL's tactics was the lobbying of public bodies such as Dublin Corporation and Dáil Éireann to highlight the treatment of prisoners since the start of the Civil War. This involved working with councillors and TDs to put forward motions, directly addressing meetings, and if this was not possible, protesting from the galleries. The WPDL had much success with Dublin Corporation, where more members were in support of their claims, including one of the WPDL members, Hannah Sheehy Skeffington, who used her position as a Dublin City Councillor to demand action on the treatment of prisoners. Sheehy Skeffington's biographer, Margaret Ward, claims that Hannah was in demand as a speaker at protest meetings. In late October, she was a speaker in Derry. At the end of October, she was the sole speaker at 3 meetings in Belfast. On 17th of July 1922, even before the WPDL was formed, Sheehy Skeffington put forward a motion at a Dublin Corporation meeting, which was seconded by the Lord Mayor, Lawrence O'Neill, that this council demands that in accordance with the universal practice prevailing in civilised countries, prisoners taken recently in action be treated while in captivity as prisoners of war. This being it is working now that it's working now that the request you had last time. Okay, yeah, but the system is working though, isn't it? The library have told us. Okay, no problem. Yeah. Okay. That this council demands that in accordance with the universal practice prevailing in civilised countries, prisoners taken recently in action be treated while in captivity as prisoners of war. This being the principle to uphold which Thomas Ashe, Terence McSweeney and many brave Irishmen have sacrificed their lives. It was passed by 24 to 16 votes. The provisional government eventually got back to the corporation on 4th of September with Cosgrave, who was also an alderman on the council and by then acting chairman of the provisional government after the death of Michael Collins in August, asking to be informed what treatment is complained of or in what particular the government has been remiss in the custody of the prisoners. The corporation agreed for Sheehy Skeffington to produce a statement of the particulars asked for by the government at its next meeting. In a letter submitted to the council at its meeting of 18th of September, Sheehy Skeffington claimed that in no jail has a prisoner of war treatment asked for by prisoners and supported by the resolution passed in council being accorded. In general, the overcrowding is so great as to be injurious to health. This Mr. Cosgrave himself admitted in Parliament. In Mountjoy, 2 are in one cell, sometimes 3, meant for one prisoner only. In Maryborough, present-day Portlaoise, from 3 to 7 in one cell. In Wellington, Kilmainham and other jails or barracks, the same overcrowding prevails. In the prison ship, over 500 men were crowded into the hold of cattle boats for days. Some of these were wounded prisoners, others suffering from scabies and highly infectious ailments arising from dirt conditions. In many barracks and disused workhouses, such as Beggar's Bush, the Curragh, Strokestown, Enniscorthy, Limerick, Cork, the sanitary conditions are of the most primitive and are a danger to health. Kilmainham is described as a cesspool, men having been compelled to live and eat close to an open sewer. In the prison ships Arbonio and Wicklow, there is practically no sanitation. The portholes are closed down and the water supply is insufficient. The food in Mountjoy, Maryborough, Wellington, etc. is insufficient and poor in quality, the so-called meat being often rejected by hungry men as unfit for human consumption. She also claimed that many had been shot dead for looking out of their windows, many wounded without warning, and a part of the list of these is as follows. The Mountjoy, 5 wounded, Maryborough, 9 shot in the yard, 3 looking out of windows, 1 died of wounds, Kilmainham, 1 shot dead, Beggar's Bush, 2 killed, Curragh, 1 shot dead, and 3 wounded, Strokestown, 3 wounded. Internal discipline in most jails is bad, indiscriminate firing upon and down corridors at night by guards and governors themselves being common. These guards and governors are often under the influence of drink and quite unfit to be in charge of prisoners. Frequently, men have been cruelly beaten by their guards under the direction of military officers as officer boards, sometimes with the hope of extracting information, sometimes out of petty spite wreaked on helpless prisoners. And here's a poster from the WPDL issued in 1923, highlighting many of the issues that Sheehy Skeffington had raised in her letter to Dublin Corporation. As a result of her harrowing letter, a motion was carried in Dublin Corporation by 22 votes to 10, asking for proper treatment of the prisoners. The WPDL followed up in early October by sending a deputation led by Despard and Gon MacBride to address Dublin Corporation. Despard stated that prisoners were being tortured in Wellington barracks, while Gon MacBride claimed that the accounts from the prisoners were terrible: overcrowding, the shooting of unarmed prisoners, shooting at night in prisons. The conditions were a disgrace to any civilised country. She could not understand how the council permitted the prisons to be in the condition they were. She talked about there being only 3 wash basins in Wellington barracks for 145 prisoners, and it took 6 weeks for her own son, Sean, to get a bath in Mountjoy prison. And here is Maud Gon MacBride in later life with her son, Sean, and grandson, Tiernan. The Irish Independent claimed that there was uproar in the gallery. Some members of the council were interrupted, and other members, who characterised the object of the deputation as propaganda, were shouted at by occupants of the gallery. Much of the ire from the gallery was directed at pro-treaty supporter Councillor Jenny Wise-Power, who, on the suggestion of the medical officer Dr. Matthew Russell of the city visiting the prisons, claimed the prisons were not the city's. They had not handed over prisons. The prisons were not theirs to hand over. Despite the commotion and the sizable opposition, a motion was carried that it be a direction from this council to Dr. Russell to present himself at each of the city jails and barracks at which prisoners are housed, or likely to be housed, for the purpose of reporting on the sanitation. Dr. Russell reported back shortly afterwards that he was not allowed to visit the prisons. The corporation then established a committee of 7 members to inquire into the general treatment of the prisoners and the charges which had been published, which included Alfie Byrne and Kathleen Clark. After a number of efforts were made to contact Cosgrave, Richard Mulcahy and Kevin O'Higgins, Cosgrave eventually told the committee that the government cannot see its way to allow the committee or any other visitors into the prisons, that he, President Cosgrave, could assure the committee that there was no ill treatment of prisoners, that the government admits that there is overcrowding, which, however, is due to the large number of prisoners and is not the fault of the government. A follow-up letter was issued by the government stating, "I am to inform you that the implication in the resolution as to the manner in which prisoners are being treated is without foundation in fact. The government owes a duty to the community, and the admission of visitors to the military prisons is not consistent with the performance of that duty. Your request must therefore be refused." Despite repeated efforts by Dublin Corporation, on many occasions spurred on by the WPDL, the Free State government refused for the medical officer to visit prisoners in Dublin jails and barracks. The corporation also supported a motion in April 1923 requesting the government to release Gon MacBride, whose great service to the country are well known. She has now been 14 days on hunger strike and is very weak, as well as 3 other women who are also on hunger strike. Here is Anne-Marie McSweeney on an open-air hunger strike outside Mountjoy Jail in solidarity with her sister Mary's hunger strike in the prison. More and more in Dublin Corporation supported the WPDL as imprisonment and internment continued, despite the ending of the Civil War in May 1923. And as it had done with its policy and executions, regardless of the considerable opposition from many of its own supporters, the Free State government resisted all calls to release Republicans long after the conflict was over. The opposition to the treatment of Republican prisoners and internees continued up to the end of 1923, when over 8,000 Republicans embarked on a hunger strike. There was also much opposition within Dublin Corporation to the Free State government's execution of Republicans. Thomas Fisher, brother of James, who was executed, was offered a platform at a Dublin Corporation meeting. There was a sombre mood in the corporation after the executions of Lee Mellows, Rory O'Connor, Joseph McKelvey and Dick Barrett in December 1922. Shortly afterwards, Alderman Joseph McDonagh died in Mountjoy Prison on Christmas Day 1922 from a burst appendix. There was outrage at the death of Noel Lamass, a Dublin Corporation employee whose tortured and mutilated body was discovered in October 1923 after being abducted in broad daylight in July, with the corporation condemning the system which organises and sustains those murder gangs. At that time, the Lord Mayor, Lawrence O'Neill's health broke down, forcing him to take time off. And with his calming influence no longer present, meetings became more fractious affairs. There was a pessimistic air in Dublin Corporation, not just from the Civil War, but the utter contempt that had quickly developed at central government level for local democracy. More and more of the corporation's time was taken up with opposition to the Free State government, with business bodies backed by the press accusing Dublin Corporation of neglecting its day-to-day duties. There was much antagonism between councillors and business groups such as the Dublin Chamber of Commerce and the Dublin Citizens Association, with those bodies regularly criticising the corporation in the press and the latter seeking dissolution of Dublin Corporation. At a meeting with a business delegation from the city in April 1923, John Charles Malcolm Eason, from the famous booksellers, complained of high rates. Sidney Orr from the Dublin Citizens Association asserted that all departments of the municipal authority were not working economically, and he focused particularly on housing. He referred to a recent contract placed by Belfast Corporation for 56 houses at a cost of £351 a house. Such houses, he claimed, would cost £1,500 in Dublin. At a Rotary Club meeting, figures were produced claiming that labourers employed by Dublin Corporation were paid far higher wages than their equivalents in Belfast, Liverpool and Glasgow. Such claims were venomously attacked by councillors, with Councillor George Lyons condemning the misrepresentation of Dublin Corporation by bodies such as the Dublin Citizens Association and the press, who described the councillors as a lot of fat-bellied capitalists with Regent Street hats and Punchestown coats. Only one member of the corporation wears a tall hat, and that's only on Sundays, and he is a member of the Citizens Association. The citizens should remember that this is the corporation that carried on the business of the Dublin during all the trouble, defying the mighty British government and refusing to send our books to audit. And yet the British never suggested that the council should be abolished. Even when the government offered a grant of road improvements, there were arguments with Dublin Corporation over the type of roads the money should go towards and the wages that could be paid to labourers. There also was bemusement, particularly from Republican councillors, that the Free State government requested that demobilised National Army men receive preferential treatment when allocating jobs to work on the roads. It all came to a head when Edward E.P. McCarran, Secretary of the Local Government Department, sent a letter on 20th of February 1924 to the Town Clerk of Dublin, John J. Murphy. McCarran was the main official in the department, a controversial appointment who was greatly distrusted by many local authorities, given that he was a former local government board official under the British regime. McCarran's letter stated, "I am directed by the Minister of Local Government to state that serious complaints have arisen concerning the administration of the Dublin Corporation. The Minister has found himself under obligation to order a local inquiry under Section 12 of the Local Government Temporary Provisions Act 1923 into the performance of its duties by the corporation." The establishment of a public inquiry to examine the affairs of Dublin Corporation really only meant one thing. It was generally understood that the calling of an inquiry into the workings of a local authority led to dissolution. There was a triumphalist reaction to the inquiry from large elements of the press, with the Irish Independent editorialising that there would be no sympathy for the corporation and referred to the gross mismanagement of the business and finances of the municipality and the callous disregard of the ratepayers and even of the unemployed ex-soldiers of the National Army. The Evening Herald's editorial was entitled "Hope for Dublin Ratepayers." Lawrence O'Neill believed that the Evening Herald had overstepped the line of decency and fair criticism. He was upset in particular by the description of the elected members as corrupt and unscrupulous brutes. He also took a swipe at W.T. Cosgrave, saying, "With an experience of what my colleagues went through in the Black and Tan regime of 3 or 4 years ago, when the men and women of this council faced prison and even assassination, and when they loyally stood behind President Cosgrave, then a member of the corporation and Minister of Local Government, it is my belief that if this corporation faltered then and did not take up a stand in giving a lead to the country, it is questionable whether you would have a Free State government in power today. And here are British troops placing barbed wire around Dublin City Hall in December 1920. With the inquiry scheduled to commence on the 11th of March in the Oak Room of the Mansion House, there was much debate in Dublin Corporation on whether it should participate or not in it. At a meeting of the Corporation on 3rd of March, Lawrence O'Neill suggested that the wave of concerted attacks in recent months against the Corporation and its elected members led him to believe that the pitch was being prepared for the holding of an inquiry. He vigorously argued that I am sufficiently long in the Corporation to know that the charges are not true, not half true, nor quarter true, nor true at all. He set up a committee to defend the Corporation case, made up of the following members. With doubt expressed over the serious complaints mentioned in McCarran's letter, Hannah Sheehy Skeffington said, the dice is loaded against the Corporation and commissioners are already appointed to draw salaries when the Corporation is superseded. Neither I nor my colleagues will shirk a fair public inquiry, but we will resist a blindfold inquiry. We are entitled to know who has formulated the complaints and why. With such startling suddenness, the government, proverbially slow, has so eagerly responded to the pressing of the button. It would be very fitting for the Free State government to put its own house in order first. The Corporation is to be tried and found guilty, not for its deficiencies, but for its virtues, and the Dublin press and the Free State authorities are clamouring for its blood. The Corporation unanimously resolved to have nothing to do with the inquiry unless they were fully informed of what the charges against them were. There was tension in the air, though, with three councillors, George Lyons, R. Rooney and Joseph McGrath, resigning the day before the inquiry started. And there were complaints from councillors about Councillor Michael J. Moran's decision to write a letter to the Department of Local Government asking for an inquiry into the workings of the municipal workshops in Stanley Street, alleging mismanagement, waste and excessive expenditure. There was a big crowd in attendance in the Oak Room in the Mansion House when the inquiry commenced on the 11th of March 1924. Conducting the inquiry was Limerick-born 29-year-old Nicholas O'Dwyer, Chief Engineering Inspector of the Department of Local Government and Public Health. He later became a commissioner in Kerry following the dissolution of the County Council there. He was appointed by the Local Government Minister, Seamus Burke, who had replaced Ernest Bly, who became Finance Minister. At the outset, O'Dwyer stated, one would conclude that the members of the Council are under the impression that the inquiry is being held to deal with some specific complaints. This is not the case. The inquiry is being held into the performance of its duties by Dublin Corporation. I have no further instructions than to hold an inquiry on these terms. He claimed the hearing would be impartial. Representing Dublin Corporation, lawyer Patrick Lynch, who subsequently became Attorney General of the Free State, asked for an adjournment so that the Corporation could have a meeting to discuss the terms of reference as laid down by O'Dwyer. This was granted by O'Dwyer, who adjourned the inquiry until 19th of March. At an animated Corporation meeting on 18th of March, O'Neill believed the Corporation should defend itself at the inquiry, while others, such as Sean T. O'Kelly, strongly objected, calling the inquiry nothing but a sham, believing it was politically motivated, backed up by a Dublin press, which was as rotten as ever. O'Kelly's motion to boycott the inquiry was defeated by 20 votes to 13, with O'Neill's original motion to participate being carried. Pitted against Lynch and Dublin Corporation was Norman Keogh, who represented the Dublin Citizens Association, and T.W. Larkin, representing the Dublin Tenants Association. Poorly prepared, Keogh focused his complaints on wages, claiming corporation workers were paid excessively. Larkin complained about the state of the streets, saying 3 laneways on Sheriff Street were in a deplorable and shocking condition, had not been cleaned for a long time, except for the removal of diseased dead dogs. He described the condition of North Lots as criminal due to the defects in the sewerage system. He drew howls of laughter from the galleries when he alleged that it was very difficult for people to get the books they wanted from the public libraries, and that the reading rooms were packed with betting men and toughs of all descriptions. I don't see anything to say in this library. His biggest issue was with the cleansing department. He was far more impressive than Keogh. The thrust of Larkin's argument was that the council appeared to have a general licence to spend as much as it liked and how it liked. The probing of Keogh and Larkin landed very few blows on corporation witnesses, though, who overall performed very well under scrutiny. Councillor Patrick McIntyre, chairman of the Streets Committee, defended his committee's performance, saying the roads were much improved from what they were 2 years previously. The defence of paving and drainage works of the corporation was also comprehensive, as was John Devine's account of the work of the cleansing department. Dr. Matthew Russell, Dublin Corporation's medical officer, also testified on work completed by the Corporation's Public Health Committee. He claimed death rates of the city in 1918 was 25 per 1,000 of the population, but by 1923 it was reduced to 15. Chairman of the Corporation's Housing Committee, Councillor John J. Murphy, claimed that over 3,000 houses had been built over the last few years, but for financial reasons, no marked impression had been made on the housing problem. They needed to build 1,000 houses per annum for the next 20 years. There also was strong testimonies on electricity, TB, technical education, with all witnesses competently defending the corporation. Lynch was also outperforming Keogh and Larkin. Larkin was accused of pocketing money owed to the Dublin Tenants Association by one witness. Unable to cross-examine anyone unless he apologised for making unsubstantiated claims against the corporation, Larkin left halfway through the inquiry, leaving the hapless Keogh to continue making the case against the corporation. The most hard-hitting evidence came from Eason from the Dublin Chamber of Commerce, particularly his complaints on the excessive cost of rates, stemming in large part from overly high wages. Eason felt wages of corporation workers should be in line with private sector businesses. The last witness was Lawrence O'Neill, who spoke on the 14th and final day, 4th of April. As a councillor for 16 years and Lord Mayor for 7 of those, O'Neill strongly defended the corporation's record. Rather than being dissolved, the corporation should actually be expanded. He also defended the corporation's wage levels. Councillors were happy with how the inquiry went and felt the corporation had received a fair hearing. Most were still not confident of the outcome, though. Many felt the inquiry was a charade and that a decision had already been made to dissolve the local authority. During another debate on releasing Republican prisoners at Dublin Corporation meeting on 7th of April, Michael J. Moran said it was a matter for the government, not for a dying body that the corporation was. While awaiting for the inquiry's outcome, the corporation continued on as usual, often critical of the Free State government. At its meeting of 19th of May, the rates were adopted for the following year. It was to be the last decision of Dublin Corporation for 6.5 years, as it was dissolved the next day on 20th of May. The town clerk, John J. Murphy, was sent a letter by Seamus Burke that the properties, powers and duties of the corporation were transferred to 3 government-appointed commissioners from 6 o'clock that evening, Tuesday, 20th of May. The 3 commissioners were Seamus Murphy, Dr. William C. Dwyer and Patrick J. Hernan. Murphy and Dwyer already held the positions as commissioners of the Dublin Union. Hernan was an inspector in the Department of Local Government, who for some months had been the chairman of the commissioners of the Cork Union. Murphy had worked directly under William T. Cosgrave in a variety of capacities since 1919. The Irish Times wrote, "The people of Dublin cannot welcome this decision. The fact that their corporation for many years has been inefficient and extravagant is very humiliating, but also indubitably true. It also stated rates were preposterously high, the streets were in a condition of chronic filth, and the thoroughfares would be a disgrace to a Lancashire mining village." There was also support for the decision from the Irish Independent and the Belfast Newsletter. On the streets of Dublin, the decision to dissolve Dublin Corporation was broadly welcomed. O'Neill called it a gross insult to the citizens of Dublin that their voice in the election of their own representatives should be taken from them. The claim that the dissolution was an insult to the citizens did not seem to be shared by many of the citizens, though. O'Neill revealed he had declined Cosgrave's offer to become chairman of the commissioners, saying it would be disloyal to his colleagues on the council. He also said he intended to remain as Lord Mayor until I hand my trust back to the people's representatives, even if I am a king without a kingdom, and that he would stay in the Mansion House. And he continued to reside there until late 1925, when he moved back to his family home in Portmarnock. While there was no public outcry, there was much opposition in the Dáil, with many calling for Burke to publish the inquiry report, which he refused to do as it was too long and therefore too expensive to publish. Late 1925. Late 1925. 24. But he stayed in the House. The Labour Party leader, Thomas Johnson, described the decision as a very extraordinary and unprecedented action, which suggests that we are rapidly going towards oligarchy and dictatorships. According to Edward Sheehy, this unprecedented display of force by government against the most ancient form of local self-rule in Ireland was received with calmness by the citizens, who seemed to share the accepted view of the corporation as a combination of corruption and inefficiency. But the inquiry discovered little evidence to support the indictment, and the suspicion has persisted that the government welcomed the opportunity of denying a platform to their political opponents and critics. The three commissioners had their first meeting on 29th of May in the council chambers of Dublin City Hall, the first time City Hall was used by the corporation for meetings since British forces occupied the building on 22nd of December 1920. It had been used by the Free State Provisional Government in 1922. They adopted a business-like approach. It was clear the three men were there to make an impression. There was a big focus on alleviating unemployment with help from the Free State Government. It was not all plain sailing for the three commissioners, but a municipal strike called to prevent the reduction in wages, a strike that carried on into August and the start of the Tailteann Games. Cosgrave was desperate to end the strike, which came to an end on 3rd of August. Electricity was restored, services were restarted. Corporation workers agreed to a slight reduction in wages from the beginning of 1925. With little fanfare, the three commissioners went about their jobs, reforming aspects of the city's municipal administration. They were helped by the fact that the Free State government was more forthcoming with funds than it had been with the corporation. Funding was provided for water supply for the north of the city, for an extension of the Dublin Tramway Company's lease, and reconstruction of the city abattoir. The three commissioners also oversaw the return of granting freedoms of the city, the first one since 1924 being granted in 1928 to James Fitzmaurice, Baron Gunter von Hunfield, and Captain Herman Cole, the Atlantic Flyers, for their pioneering east-west transatlantic flight. It still was the intention of the Free State government to hold elections eventually to a newly reformed Dublin Corporation. A Greater Dublin Commission of Inquiry was established under the chairmanship of Professor William McGuinness. While many of the recommendations the inquiry report published in 1926 were rejected by the government, a city manager was appointed. The three commissioners were overlooked, and town clerk Gerard Sherlock became Dublin's first city manager instead. Voting for members of the new Dublin Corporation took place on 30th of September 1930. 35 members were elected. The 159th and final meeting of the Dublin Commissioners took place on 11th of October 1930. They had, according to Aig Quinlivan, served Dublin well. During their time in charge, rates were substantially reduced, water supply to the north side of the city was greatly improved, the number of corporation tenants more than doubled, and social services, especially in the area of child welfare, were expanded. The first meeting of the new Dublin Corporation took place on 14th of October, when Alfie Byrne was elected Lord Mayor, a role he held for many years to come in a corporation that was significantly changed from when it last convened over 6 years previously. So that's the end of this talk, and the next and final talk is actually in 2 days' time, so not next Tuesday, it's actually 2 days' time, this Thursday, here in this very same place, as well as being live streamed on the Talton Games of 1924. Just before I conclude, so here's some books to read. Well, the most appropriate book by a country mile is Vindicating Dublin by A. Quinlivan, which is the story behind the dissolution of Dublin Corporation. It was actually published by Dublin City